In this section of the introduction, we'll talk about Type 1 and Type 2 sales managers. So by the end of this lesson, we will have defined two types of sales managers. And the reason we're going to do this is throughout the course, we're going to establish Type 1 and Type 2. They have very different personalities. They have very different strengths and weaknesses. And it's very important that whichever one you are, we define so that we can talk about very specific targets that may be needing to be approached, or maybe different things that need pros and cons that need to be overcome or focused on, depending on the section that we're in. So the only point here is to just establish what a Type 1 sales manager is and what a Type 2 sales manager is. So the spoiler alert, there's those with sales background and those without sales background. And what I mean by sales background, they've carried the bag. They've been a direct sales rep. So Type 1 sales managers are typically, think of them in the sports context of a player coach. They carried the bag, they've been a sales rep, they know what it takes to be a sales rep in the industry they're in. Maybe you've got sales experience outside the industry. That would still be a Type 2 sales manager by the definition we'll use. Type 1 has to do with, can you relate directly to what your sales reps are going through because you've done their job? So this is, think of the player coach that's typically been promoted up. Upper management, they use the logic in this instance of they can replicate themselves. I think this is a false narrative. I think you don't want them to replicate themselves. That sounds good on paper initially, but the problem is most of your sales team is typically very diverse in how they sell. You don't usually have 5 or 6 or 10 of the exact same sales personalities. If you read any of the sales books out there, the personality types vary widely, and that's good. It gives you a good diverse group of people who can sell to all different buyers. And to think that a single rep can just promote up and understand all those diverse aspects, that on paper is where I have a problem with promoting a Type 1 to be just to replicate themselves. If there's other things, and we'll talk about this in a minute, other core motivators that are pushing them to be sales managers, that's really where they should be promoted, not to replicate themselves, because I'm not going to be able to replicate my personality across the team. You wouldn't want that even if I could do it. So the sales rep motives, like I was just talking about, they could be that maybe they're moving up because they don't have a quota, which is actually wrong. They've got a bigger quota, but they don't have a direct quota. That gets them out of the day-to-day grind. That's a big motivator. It gives them some power that maybe they haven't had in the past. They're in charge. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Hopefully the main is desire to lead, or another more servant leader type motivation that moves them out of sales into sales management. If they're really trying to take and lead the team, or they want to make better of what's out there, that's hopefully a better motivator than just I'm trying to get out of the grind, which I've seen as an initial motivator, not always what ends the motivation for them as they get into the role. So let's talk about Type 1 sales managers' pros and cons. So one pro is they're clearly promoting up because they're very good at what they've done. So they've got confidence in the actual sales job. What their team is doing today, they know how to do very well on a regular basis. And they understand the current sales process that the organization uses. That's a huge plus for any sales manager coming into the role, to already have those two things knocked out. They also have experience in forecasting, and we'll talk about forecasting in a whole its own section, but forecasting is a learned thing. It is not a skill that somebody knows how to do very well out of the gate. Prognostication, as it really is something people are not as good at as they think they are. They always think they're better. Watch anybody who gambles, they're going to lose over time. But they're going to tell you that they're really good at gambling because they won a couple of bets. They forget the ones they lose very quickly. They have short memory there. But prognosticating is difficult, and it's a skill that takes time to hone and get better at. And if you've never done this, other than maybe in a budget context, it's not the easiest thing to pick up on right away. It can be learned over time, but these sales reps typically have good forecasting skills already, or at least practiced forecasting skills that they're bringing to the table for a bigger forecast and a more important forecast that we'll talk about as we go through. The cons of a type 1 sales manager are they may struggle with rep autonomy. So they may struggle with letting their reps, and we'll talk about this more in self-determination theory in the next section, but being able to allow the reps that they now manage have the freedom is very important, but it's also sometimes difficult. Sometimes these folks don't have the management skills, they don't have the management background, and they get a little bit micro, and so they may struggle to give some freedom to the reps. They may try to take more control over the situation to get better results, thinking they'll get better results when actually that restricts results. In my opinion, this is probably the biggest one. Sales managers who have promoted up from sales rep losing control of their time, where their time is no longer their own. If they've been a good rep, which almost all of these type 1 sales managers are, they're all very good reps. To promote up after you've had all this freedom, you can come and go as you please, and now all of a sudden your time is somebody else's. It's no longer your own. You have more customers across the entire team that need your attention. You have more reps that are needy, probably less productive than you were as a rep, and they need your time. All of a sudden, you don't have the flexibility, and if you go to try to create that same flexibility, you really negatively impact the team. So losing control of their time is one of the biggest cons that I've seen for a sales manager. And this will come up again when we get to recruiting. I want to talk about specifically where you can target this in your favor. But this is one of those areas that you just need to be aware of. If you're a type 1 sales manager, being okay with losing control of your time needs to be something, because for all the roles you have to accomplish, imagine a football player today at the college level, and then he gets hurt. He's had all this, he had his regiment. He would go to training, or he would go to weights, he would go do all these things, and then he gets injured really bad. And after recovering, he can't play football anymore, and now he's going to coach. Imagine the change that has to take place there, because now you have to be there before practice preparing. You have to be there during practice while the players are getting ready and doing their things. You have to then be there after practice for cleanup, or for just going over what was seen, what was done. All of a sudden, it's way more time consuming. This is no different than it is for a new sales manager coming in. All of a sudden, those are the kind of things that take place in your world where you have to prepare more, you have to clean up more, you have to be involved more. It's just going to take more of your time as a sales manager. And I just want to stress that type 1 sales managers, this is probably the one glaring thing we'll talk about the most throughout the course. And the other thing is that where their confidence may lack is that they think they've been promoted up, that all of a sudden they have to be good at all aspects of sales. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nobody is good at all aspects of sales. Nobody. I've met tons of reps, hundreds of reps over my career. None of them know it all. I've met VPs, I've met general managers, I've met sales directors, I've met sales managers. No one, including myself, know all aspects of sales and are good at all aspects of sales. They have their strengths and weaknesses. Some are good at one area, some are weaker at other areas. I will be very open and honest and transparent about areas that I'm weak in sales, and help you understand where I went to find additional resources and help. You do not have to be good at all aspects. Nobody expects your confidence in sales to cover all of sales. If you look at any coach in the NFL, NBA, and say, well, are they good? Are they really the best at post play for a basketball coach? When maybe it's Steve Kerr, who's been a great NBA coach, he was a great player. How much does he really know about the post game versus the guard game? Well, he was an excellent guard. He knows a lot about playing point guard. He doesn't know everything. There were people that were better in certain aspects of the game than he was as a point guard, but he knows the most about being a point guard. He doesn't know the most about being a postman. So I guarantee he's got people on his staff who are much better at coaching the low post than him. And that's the way you need to think about sales. There are areas you are great at in sales. Focus on those. Be good at those. Improve your other areas, but focus where you're strong. And bring in and delegate areas where you're not. And then if you're a first-time manager, as you've promoted up, let's say you've never, this is common for type 1 sales managers. If you're If you're a first-time manager, you may struggle with management. One of the most common flaws of a first-time manager of any type, whether it's sales or not, is being the boss. Think of it like being the sibling, where you've got siblings and you're the oldest and you're put in charge, or you are the youngest and you watched your oldest be put in charge. The very first thing that those siblings do in those situations when they're put in charge is almost always common human thing is to be the boss. Don't be the boss. You're the manager. You're there to solve problems. You're not there to walk around micromanaging. You're not there to be looking over people's shoulders. You're, how do I remove obstacles and allow my people to perform? They know how to do the job. Most of them know how to do it really well. But just because you were the one that promoted doesn't mean you're the one that now needs to be over everybody telling them what to do. They just don't need that. But it's a common first manager's mistake. So just make sure you're checking yourself to not be the boss, because you don't need to be. Your people know how to perform. So now let's talk about type 2 sales managers. So typically these individuals are either going to be brought in from outside the organization or within a sales support group. So think about sales engineers, think about sales operations. Those are the type of areas where sales managers could be brought in from, where they're not in direct sales today for that organization. Could also be somebody's been in sales but not within the industry, and they're coming in from outside bringing new ideas that may or may not work. I've seen both sides of this work, and spoiler alert to the whole end of this section, there is no pros or cons, or there is no one side wins. There's no always go with type 1 or type 2 sales managers. They both have, I've seen both ones be very successful. So don't think that they can't be. So typically these folks come in with a management background, so that's going to be a pro. They're not going to start off with the boss, being the boss. They understand some of the days in, day out routine of being the manager. So let's talk about their pros and cons. So first of all, type 2 sales managers are used to giving their time. They've been typically in a management role or in a support role where it's not about them, it's about supporting sales. And so for them to continue to support sales is not a big ask of giving up their time. The other thing is again, they've typically come with management skills of some sort already in the bag, and that way you're not dealing with some of the first-time manager problems that come up and arise. Again, not at the end of the world if it is their first time being a manager, but having management skills obviously gets them off the ground a little bit quicker. They're going to have more confidence in delegating sales skills. They're not coming in thinking they have to be confident or overconfident in their sales skills. They know what they know, and what they don't know they can delegate to somebody who's better at it than they are. That's key. Their cons, though, are they are going to be insecure of their sales skills. If somebody's really stuck on something and the manager feels like I need to solve this and I don't have the skill set to do it, all of a sudden they feel like they've let their teammate down, their rep down, and they don't want to do that. These can be good servant leaders that want to come in and say, let me help you with your sales skills, but their insecurity of it could prohibit them early on as while they're trying to learn and improve that skill. The other thing is ability to recruit sales talent. This should not be underestimated. Sales talent is very unique in scouting, finding, and bringing in and good sales talent, obviously top sales talent. And this is something that if you're in sales, I think you have a leg up on being able to recruit and understand who can do the job better than if you're not a former sales rep. This can be learned. It just takes a lot more effort to figure out. You're gonna make some mistakes along the way that have to be honed in how you go about interviewing, how you go about identifying, and you're going to get it wrong. And you need to be okay with the fact you're not going to have a 100% hit rate on bringing in the best talent. You'll have talent that you think is going to be great on paper, and there's going to be things you need to learn when you're wrong and be able to admit that you were wrong and made a mistake. And then typically there's not a history of forecasting in this person. So a type 2 sales manager needs time to learn how to forecast. We've got a complete section on forecasting where we'll go into it all the way down into the weeds on it, but you need to understand you're going to struggle with this if you're a type 2 sales manager until you learn how to do it better You'll have to use tracking mechanisms and set goals and parameters around how close of a forecast you want to get to early on, and figure out how to get it to where you're within, let's say, 5% of your forecast from the beginning of your period, whether it's beginning of the month or beginning of the quarter, that by the end you want to be within 5% if possible. That's a good target for forecasting. And we'll talk about that more when we get to forecasting. So sales manager types, type 1 and type 2 do not have a distinct advantage. They've got different pros and cons. I have seen both type 1 and type 2 be very successful sales managers. Again, it depends on their ambition level and their motivations for being in those positions. The ones who are motivated properly and the ones who have high ambition will succeed, period. It's just like anything else in life. But don't feel that type 1 or type 2 has a distinct advantage, because they just have different pros and cons. And just as an FYI, in my experience, there's no good documentation on this, but to my own witnessing of it, it's about a 5-to-1 ratio on type 1 sales managers to type 2. They're just much more common to be promoted within than to be brought in from outside when people are looking at a sales management position, upper management. I think the pool that they pull from is typically more sales that's looking to grow up. They think that's a good pathway for them. We'll talk about that more in recruiting, but it can be a good pathway up for certain people that are looking for management experience and want to lead the team. So, not saying that there's a good or bad with being a type 1 sales manager. I think it's important to understand the statistic. That way, if you're a type 1, it tells you you're more likely to find a peer you're looking for to bounce ideas off of. If you're looking to offset that and you want to talk to a type 2, they're just going to be harder to find. And same if you're a type 2 sales manager. Type 1s are a dime a dozen to network with and peer with. Type 2s, where you're trying to bounce similar ideas off of, will just be a little bit more difficult to find within the organization. So in conclusion, for this section, type 1 sales managers are just previous sales reps that have promoted up and have all the different pros and cons from a type 2 sales manager who is one with no previous sales. Again, no distinct advantage to being a type 1 or type 2. Both I've seen succeed very, very well in their organizations.